Now let's talk about some substantive attacks. First, let's talk about governing rules and standards. You'll be surprised how many experts do not consider whether their work is supposed to be done in accordance with any established procedures or government standards or regulations or professional standards. But you can attack their credibility even if it isn't subject to those things. To start, ask the expert whether the work is subject to standards or government regulations. You should know ahead of time whether, for example, the Financial Accounting Standards Board has standards that apply to the work, or other types of professional organizations. Then ask the expert what he or she did to ensure that their work complied with those standards. Few experts take that step. If the work is not governed by those kinds of things, ask the expert whether there is any limit or outer boundary that constrains the opinions that they're giving in the case in any way. Sometimes the expert will admit that they're unconstrained at all. Another substantive attack is the abandonment of adverse approaches. Some experts will take an approach to the issue only to find that the results support your side of the case. So they stopped further work on that approach and found something else to support their opinion. You need to find out if that happened. And if it did, you need to ask why. Then go back to the value proposition at the start of the deposition about not favoring one side and get the expert to admit that they violated that important principle, even though they swore under oath to you that they adhered to it. Replicability, another attack. The results of any valid scientific study should be replicable by others experienced in the field. This is a large area of potential attack, and you need to work it out in advance with your expert. You need to have your expert replicate the tests and results of the other side. If your expert could not do so, you need to know why, and then probe the other side's expert to find out what they did and why they got the results they got. You may find out that the report does not accurately describe the work that the expert did. Now that's going to hurt their credibility, of course. Based on the information your expert gives you, there will be additional lines of attack for credibility based on the presence or absence of sensitivity testing by the other side's expert. We'll come back to that in a couple of minutes. Another attack substantively is external validation by others, treatises, etc. That's what I put this into the category of. Depending on the subject area and the field of the expertise, there may be ways that any expert can confirm that their approach, their method, and conclusions and opinions are correct. You need to ask about each one of those, each one. For example, did you consult with anyone to confirm that your approach to this issue and the testing that you did for the presence of this compound on the fabric is used by other experts in your field? Or, did you review any guidebooks, treatises, or other written materials to confirm that what you did is consistent with what others in the field are supposed to do? Or is there a journal or a book on the shelf of the research library at the University of blank, wherever you teach, that confirms that the approach you took here is the right approach under these circumstances? Another substantive attack is the disclosure of insufficient results to enable validation. What do I mean by that? Your expert may have been unable to validate the adverse expert's work. It may be because information is missing from the report of the adverse expert. If so, you need to get the expert to confirm, and then you need to ask why he or she omitted it. The answer usually will raise a question about the validity of the work or the credibility of the expert. For example, I was deposing a forensic acoustic engineer. The issue in the case was whether sets of several hundred sound recordings, popular music recordings and songs from the 1960s, were the same, or whether one set was different because it reflected remastering changes that altered their acoustic properties, that is to say, what the ordinary listener heard. It was important in a state law copyright case. Now, each sound recording was 2.5 to perhaps 5 minutes long, yet the other side's expert presented results of testing of only the first 5 seconds of each recording. When I asked the expert why, I learned that it was because he had tested only the first 5 seconds. He could not defend that. He couldn't defend taking such a small slice of each recording, and the judge threw out his testimony. Failure to test or consider other information. This is an area where your expert will help you prepare for the deposition. But even if that can't or doesn't happen, you should ask the adverse expert what he or she did in the way of sensitivity and other testing to see whether other information, if considered, would alter the results or lead to a contrary result and opinion. If the answer is, no, I didn't do that, you need to ask why. And then you need to ask whether the expert to validate whether not doing that, such as by asking others in the field or consulting reference books or materials, is an acceptable practice. You need to ask the expert why they weren't even curious to know whether additional or other information might validate or undermine their opinions. And you should ask whether this is how the expert has behaved in other cases. Often you'll find there's been a deviation. Our last substantive attack is the inability of the expert to testify based on their own graphics and data. Some experts will cram test results, including a lot of graphical information, into a presentation that's hard to read or understand. Now, why would they do that? There are no page limits on expert reports, so usually they're doing that to hide something. And if so, you need to find out and take advantage of it. In one case, I showed an expert just an excerpt from one of the reports of one graph, and then I showed the expert a couple of other graphs in a series, and I asked them, what does this show? And the expert said he couldn't tell me what it showed. Then I showed him a full page of his report, and again, he couldn't tell me what he was looking at. He said he needed his access to his laptop to be able to explain the graphs in his own report. The judge tossed out his testimony. Well, that's the last of our substantive attacks, and it takes us to the end of the program. As you can see, each expert and each case will provide unique opportunities and challenges to examine the expert and get what you need for trial. Thanks for listening and tuning in. If you'd like more information about our firm, please go to the QuinnEmanuel.com website and come back to this page for more videos from our other attorneys. Again, thanks for listening.